I want to believe.
Definitely.
Definitely. All right. So if you want to join us this morning to share your thoughts on the stories that we'll be talking about, WhatsApp is the platform. You can do that by sending your messages in on 0809 444 We're also streaming on YouTube. You can find us at Smooth 981 FM Lagos. Smooth 981 FM Lagos. You can drop comments on the YouTube live, and I definitely will be taking your thoughts as we go along this morning. Alrighty, we're going to begin in the Vanguard newspaper talking about the IMF. Yes, they've been in the news recently, especially where Nigeria is concerned. Now, against the backdrop of frustrations faced by the general public in Nigeria and some other sub-Saharan African countries undergoing economic reforms, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has rolled out a set of recommendations on how to make the reforms acceptable and supported by the citizens. Now, the IMF, in its latest regional economic outlook for sub-Saharan Africa report, noted that countries involved in deep reforms, including Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Kenya, may now be experiencing what it called adjustment fatigue, while some are facing civil resistance. Of course, if we bring this home to Nigeria, there have been different cases of civil unrest, the protests that have happened in August, another one in October as well, off the back of the reforms that were put in by the Tinubu administration, removal of fuel subsidy, the floating of the nation's currency, the naira, and all that. Now the IMF is saying, okay, it's like these reforms are probably not clicking yet, or they haven't been implemented properly, and all that. Now, is the IMF in a good place to actually be, making these statements to say that, oh, these reforms, they're not working as they should because of this, because of that, because IMF recently has also been in the eye of the storm in terms of then getting the blame for some of the decisions taken by the government and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on this, Chibuzor?
So the typically, well, in climes like this, and obviously most parts of the developing world, the IMF does have a very dodgy reputation, especially in terms of things like this, which is economic policies, adjustments by government, changing of tightening of belts, basically getting governments to streamline their expenses. And typically, um, a lot of people have very little. A lot of people, especially in the developing world, have very little faith in the IMF. As far as they're concerned, the IMF is a tool of the developed countries, the big nations who need the developing world to remain at the level where they are to provide whatever they need and all that. And truth be told, over time, when you look at what the things that the IMF has been linked with, reputation wise, you have a lot of questions to ask. But I think I would take a bit of a dispassionate view and try and look at the merit and demerit of what they're trying to do, and what got us here in the first place. So because if you talk to a typical Nigerian about the IMF, what they remind you of is we first got here because we had to at some point where we had to embrace what was the structural adjustment program many years ago, which was one of the things that the IMF pushed forward to the then governments, and we had to tighten our belts. We had to deregulate them, devalue the naira from when it was maybe $1 to a naira, and all this nice stuff that they used to talk about in the past. But what a lot of people tend to forget or not take into consideration is that in every system there are rules. In managing your economy there are rules. You can't keep spending what you don't have. You can't keep looking for spending what you don't have or stealing what you have. At some point push will come to shove. So the truth is that we have to look at where are we today in Nigeria. We basically, for one reason or another, we can talk about corruption, we can talk about mismanagement, we can talk about all the other issues that are bedeviling our economy and our systems. But we are where we are today. At this point, the government has had the need to go and seek for funding from outside the shores of Nigeria. And they've gone to places where they can get it, which is the World Bank. And these guys have basically put things on the table and say, you know what, before we give you our money, because it is their money,
Oh yes.
you have to do A, B, C, and D. And it's it's almost the same when you're lending money to somebody that you're not sure when he's going to pay back. So if I'm lending money to my cousin who doesn't have a job, first I'm asking how are you going to pay me back my money? And if I see that he's earning a particular income, I'll give him a structured plan that this is what I want to see, which is what happens with the IMF, uncle. So they rolled out, supposedly rolled out some of these ideas. The government also had looked at it and said, we're going to put forward some of these plans and we're going to apply it. It's so since May 29th, we've seen a slurry of actions, activities by the government. The devaluation of well, not the floating of the naira. Let's not say the devaluation, or the floating of the naira, which obviously caused some devaluation. So the naira did lose its value against the dollar when it was allowed to stand on its own. We also saw things like what was the again? The big one, subsidy removals. And we've also seen things like increasing of prices of electricity, power, basically, and with that, every other thing with inflation in the background, inflation has increased. So month by month, we've had increases in inflationary numbers. So where are we today as Nigerians? Nigerians are trying to cope with all the various outcomes of the various policies all coming at once, and dealing with those realities that's coming, because just with additional inflation, I think we are doing 30-something% now. Basically, what it means is that a Nigerian who had some money last year, had a million or 100,000 last year, basically that value at May 29th, or somewhere before we start running into this, has lost a significant part of that money. So and it's not just about the individuals. So you're looking at it, the micro and macro economy. So even companies that were trading, you did a contract last year at the start of last year at 400 naira to $1. Now you're dealing with 4 times the value. So if you're importing anything, you had a contract that was pegged at a particular exchange rate. For you to continue dealing with that vendor who is outside the country, you're having to look for 4 times the amount of money of naira to get $1 to make that transaction continue. So you've seen the ripple effect in the manufacturing industries. Either what you've seen is either everybody who's providing a service or providing goods have either quadrupled their prices or have basically adjusted their prices to meet the prevailing economic conditions, and obviously it's been passed on to the individual people. So everybody, at least in almost every other sector, people have had to pay more for the services they used to get about a year ago. So what is happening to the Nigerians? A lot of Nigerians obviously are looking for solutions, searching for solutions, hoping for solutions. There is, like the IMF has easily pointed out, there's been a lot of civil unrest. Well, there's been some level of civil unrest. We've had at least several strikes, which are not really new, but we've had the protests.
Right.
At least I think since 29th of May, we've had at least 3 or 4 different protests that were planned. I think maybe 3 happened, 4 were planned. We've had arrests that have stemmed out of those protests.
Sure.
We have people that have been kept in prison for months as an outcome of those protests. We have had property that's been destroyed and vandalized. We've had all those things. And what the IMF is pointing out, the Nigerian government needs to take another look at not at the policies themselves, but how are they passing on those policies. So
right.
I was one of those guys that felt that hey, this government had no choice when they were going to step in. They had to remove subsidies. At some point they had to look at the naira and see how are we going to deal with the naira, because they couldn't afford. The previous government had basically spent all the foreign reserves in trying to prop up the naira, because as long as we're not selling stuff and replacing, we had shortages in our sales of crude oil, which is our major forex earner. So we're not able to meet the demand for forex, and Nigerians demand forex. We are, one of the major issues that we have is that we manufacture very little. I'm not saying we should manufacture everything that we consume locally, but
at least that should be.
Let's have a framework for manufacturing. So even if we are not able to produce it locally, we're able to get some value in that allows us to pay for what we need, not what we want.
Right.
But we got to the point where we weren't able to meet up with those demands, and this government really had little choice. But how did they implement it is one thing and the other. And the IMF has pointed out several things. They've talked about sequencing of some of these, policies and plans and some of these interventions. How does the government design them? How do they sequence them? What we tend to see, even with things like fuel increases today, is you just wake up one day and you see something, and you just have to adjust. It's almost like what's this word? It's like when someone's on drugs and you just take a person off drugs, you have cold turkey.
Cold turkey.
Yeah, it's almost like cold turkey. Nigerians just need to adjust one way or the other. Then afterwards, the government will come and explain what has happened. We need to get to the point where we have some level of engagement, and the government, the civil society trying to drive it. I think one of the responsibilities of the civil society have to take upon themselves is not just to find themselves in opposition at every demand, but have to engage.
Right.
And the government also needs to be able to open to engagement. How do we sort out these things? the government also needs to look at what are the optics, because when you ask your people to make adjustments, and the only adjustments the people tend to see from your own end are buying new expensive airplanes, renovating your buildings, adding cars to the fleet. In fact, even the daily fact where you guys and people are trying to navigate through the difficult roads that the government is supposed to, or the bad roads that the government is supposed to be maintaining, and all of a sudden you just see a fleet of guys coming and blaring with their things and pushing you guys off the roads. Those things are the things that send the signal to people that's telling them that you do not care, and the government needs to take a deep rethink about it. We need to, if the government is going to do business, there are a lot of things that the government needs to look into itself. I'm not just about the government at the executive level, the civil service, the state governments, the local governments. What are we doing? How do we set the tone to let our people know that we are all in this together, and that this journey that we're going on, and that's talks to education, is going to get us to these desired outcomes? It's not enough that the president wakes up from time to time, and when he's pressed to give speeches, maybe on the October 1st, and times when he's forced to give a speech, and comes out with a list of promissory notes that he's been reading since May 29th, or telling us numbers that are fictional that people can add value to. So, we have brought in 30 billion, or it's almost like 30 BG gang. We brought in 30 billion of foreign investments, when we know what's on ground, or we've gotten promissory notes of that. I think we should speak less of promises, or what is on the reality, and tell the people that, see, this is what it is. We know where we are.
Right.
We are not.
Right.
We've not done everything that we need to do, but we're still on a journey to do that. And this is what we need to do in intervening time to
Definitely.
do it. The government has been selling a lot of hope, but at some point, hope will fade if you don't add concrete outcomes. And we're not talking about promissory notes or propaganda. People have to see those things happening. The last minister for education, for instance, was talking about how people were off, how he had, I think he was banding the number of 7 million kids that he had taken off the whatever out of school kids.
Yeah, former education.
Yeah,
minister.
Maman, I think it was Maman.
Yeah, Maman.
And it was so funny because we could see these numbers, that these numbers are not decreased. And this now, I think some weeks, was it last week, they were talking about taking off in FCT, or trying to get 100,000 kids. Okay, if you took off 7 million, where did these kids come up from? We need to be a bit realistic, and we need to be upfront with the people. The government needs to engage better. And we're not just talking about the government at the federal level, at all levels. And we need to be a bit more realistic. What we've seen, a lot of types of engagement, and for me, a lot of it is a propaganda. So at some point, what you hear from everybody that comes from the ruling party is that, these things are global, that is happening everywhere in the world. Nigeria is not just different from it. Come on, we dug our own pit. We need to dig ourselves out of it, and we need to be upfront with our people. Let's stop trying to sell. Nigerians are smarter than this. As much as at times we don't act it, but we're smarter than this.
Most definitely. And you know what? Talking about engagement, we need to move on to our next. We're talking about engagement here. The Nigerian Air Force has been hard at work. We're heading into the punch here. Now, the Air Force announced on Monday that airstrikes conducted by the air components of Operation Fansan Yama have killed several terrorists in Niger State. Now, the operation also targeted strategic arms depots and the residence of a notorious kingpin, Malam Saleh, a loyalist of Dogo Gide. Now, these are the sort of stories that we actually want to hear. Not, we are going to, we intend to, we will. Now, this has actually happened, but we don't hear enough of these particular stories of these operations being carried out and results happening. We hear more of we will, we shall. What do we need to do more of to see more of these stories coming out in this war against terror in Nigeria?
So kudos to the Nigerian Air Force, and kudos to the Nigerian military, and by extension, the Nigerian government. It's good to hear things like this, especially in this time of the year and this season. And I, like you mentioned earlier, we would like to hear a lot more of this. We do know that the men of the Nigerian military are on the line, at the front lines, placing their lives at risk so that the rest of us can benefit. And I think what what I always tell people is that what we can do, what the government can do, is to make sure that, if not everything that they require, at least the basic needs, salaries, everything they need are gotten to them. And it's also good to manage information. And we were talking about the engagement and information in the last story, and this also speaks to the same. while there's a lot of concern about security, and I wouldn't say our security issues are straightforward to resolve, because a lot of them are born also from the same issues that we discussed earlier, which are the state of the nation, economic situations,
Mm.
culture. There are then people taking that particular people taking advantage of it with a mix of small culture, small religion, small what you call the tribal lines, and
Sentiments and all that.
sentiments. But the truth is that if people largely, and I'm not speaking to everybody, if rational people, well rational people, largely in most cases, were had lives worth living and were gainfully engaged, it will be harder. I'm not saying impossible, but harder to recruit them to some of these things that we are seeing, because what we saw over time is that it became too easy to recruit them. And if we step aside from this, so if you look at the last protest, what we talked about, some of the guys that were released, they were part of the vandalization in the last protest in Abuja and the north, part of the north. It reminded us of how there is almost like a willing army of youth who are there to be conscripted and, conscripted into any cause, as long as somebody is able to put something on the table or sell them a story or
Exactly.
engage them in a particular way. If you ask a lot of them why they were protesting, yes, they knew that there's hunger in the land, blah blah blah, but you know, ask them if they understood in depth why they were doing what they were doing. They did not have an idea. They were just conscripted to, let's go out to grouped whatever came in, just went and stayed destroying stuff, because they didn't know. Most of them either didn't know any better, didn't feel any better, or they were actually told to go and do stuff. And so for me, we need to solve the problem, not just asking the military to be reactive and trying to solve these issues, but after we are done with it, after the military is done with you know knocking out these strategic targets, knocking out these bases in Shiroro, what is the plan afterwards? Are we, is that place going to be safe, and space and the surrounding area is going to be safe enough for people to go back there and continue with their lives and their businesses? You know, are the people around those areas going to be, how do you engage the people around those areas so that they do not become a feeder into the next set of insurgents in around any of those places?
That is a very important question to ask.
What are the plans? And it's a bit challenging, especially when the country is in this situation it is. But it's, if you look at most countries who are in this kind of situation, you see where they are. They're either in economic strife. There's some level of strife or thought and arguments, and you get into those positions, and people, at the end of the day, you might win the military war, but you might just we've been caught up. If you look at it, we've been in this battle for 10, 15 years now, or more,
20 years,
or 20 years more. How much longer can we continue spending on this? Because don't forget, a chunk of our spending now is on military stuff, and that money could, if we're open to ourselves, if we get this out of the way, could be spent on other things. And once we're able to sort this out, if you're able to ever sort this out, we have once you're able to sort security, you can now attract a lot more
a lot of
people,
other things will definitely follow.
Nigerians who want to travel from one point of the other to country to the other and spend their money or whatever, look for opportunities, but that's not happening now.
It's rather unfortunate that.
So, but yeah,
that's
like I said again, thanks to the Nigerian Air Force and the Nigerian military for the job well done.
All right, let me take a couple of messages. JP says the government profligacy is high. Her narrative and communication is at variance with concrete steps to develop a productive economy. Not sure they care, but just want to bid or bide time. Cheers. Thank you for sharing your thoughts there. JP also talking to us. Adiboy Gadidiji says the incoming president is far away in Brazil endorsing global alliance against hunger and poverty and reveals his subconsciousness. This is the same president that has thrown his own nation into unprecedented hardship, hunger, and poverty through his bad economic policies due to his incapability to think and to come out with strategic plans to revive the economy of Nigeria. But out there in Brazil, he's making a lifeless statement. I call it global hypocrisy. Michael says the same government came out to say we should start planting at home. Has the government taken any initiative to show that it's serious about subsistence farming? Why is it difficult for the government to do what it says? Who is auditing the spending of the government? Excuse me. Imagine when we're told tighten our belts. Belts did not seem to be tightened on the government side of things, really. Joseph Maye says it's madness how things have turned out in Nigeria. Please, is there any country in the world where the naira is used in Nigerian owned companies? Why then the Nigerian government, both former and present, encouraging a dollarized economy? The Buhari administration had a currency swap with China to reduce dependence on dollars for importers that is silent because people are benefiting from all the chaos in the economy.
So I would like to speak to this a bit. I know a lot of people say a lot about the dollarized economy, and I always try and understand where they are coming from. But the basic fact is that as long as you're not producing a large chunk of what you need, and you're importing a large chunk, so we're not talking about just importing perfumes or clothes or stuff. We're importing machinery in our factories. When we need replacement parts, most times we're having to source them from abroad. For our cars, when our cars break down, we get it from abroad. We have to pay dollars for those things because those guys on the other side of the table will collect dollars. Yes, the swap was a policy, but if you recall, that swap was limited to a particular amount and a particular period. And why is that? Because for you to trade, at an equal basis, both parties must exchange value. We cannot just, China cannot just say, hey, we're going to continue with this, because if they get plenty of your naira, what are they going to do with your plenty of your naira? You know what you're going to do with plenty of their currency, because you're going to go there and buy stuff and bring in. But when you drop your naira there, what else can they do with it apart from giving you back?
What's the value of it to them?
Yes, because they just give it back to you when you come again.
All right, let's get back into the messages. Keep them coming in on WhatsApp on 0809444091. YouTube as well, Smooth 981 FM Lagos for streaming live. Emmanuel Annie on YouTube, thank you for the kind words. And of course, the feedback as well. Very much appreciated. All right, let's head into the punch and talk about the Senate. They are in the news. On Monday, they vowed to invoke parliamentary sanctions against any head of federal government agencies which had been indicted for financial infractions in the report submitted to the National Assembly by the Auditor General for the Federation. This was the Chairman Senate Committee on Legislative Compliance, Senator Garba Madoki, gave the warning at a one-day workshop in Abuja. He lamented the rate at which heads of the MDAs have been shunning Senate summons and warned that further disregard for the resolutions of the Red Chamber would no longer be tolerated. I mean, that sounds like a lot of bluster and blowing of hot air. But what does it say about the Senate, their standing, respect that is had for them, if they are saying that a lot of the heads of these agencies, they shun summons? I mean, what does that say about them, and of course the heads of these agencies as well?
So to start with, I think one of the things I get a bit frustrated about is when I hear a lot of these sound bites, a lot of these promises. I would like to see them take action on them. So to start with, why do we have the Senate committees? Senate committees are supposed to have some oversight over MDs and government spending. The government, to a large extent, is supposed to be accountable to them. And I do believe they are instruments that ensure some level of accountability. Now, when the Senate sends out a summons in every country, and let's say Nigerian Senate is, while a lot of us might not have very high opinions about the Nigerian Senate. If you watch enough of global television, you probably see that it's made of the same way it's made of character, the same way the American Senate or any of the other Senate, the chambers or whatever in any part of the world is. The only thing is that they are subject to those laws, they are subject to institutions, and they have to follow those laws, the institutions that govern those laws, for whatever situation it is, whichever parties they represent and whatever the parties believe in. There are still laws that they're subject to. So when the Senate issues a summons to the head of an MDA, my assumption is that the head of MDA would show up, or at least send the high-leveled representative when they are not able to answer the questions, because the MDA is aware that the funding for their parastatal is tied to the approvals by the Senate. So basically, what happens in most countries is that the Senate holds the purse strings, and they know. So the guy knows that, hey, it's almost like stakeholder management. There are people that maybe this committee, the chairman he's not going to be here for too long. I don't need to bother about him because he's going to be out in the next 3 months. But that these guys are going to be seated there for 4 years. But what we see a lot, or we hear a lot, is that you have summons and nobody cares about it, because unfortunately we've not allowed the systems and the structures to work the way they ought to work. The head of the MBAs feel a lot more loyalty to whichever Baba Saleh has put them there. Or they are much more worried about how they feel than how the Senate committee chairman feels, because at the end of the day, it will become a party issue and it will be sorted out at that level. So we do need to change people and start holding people accountable at those levels, because really what we have seen is a lot of abuse, a lot of profligacy. We talk about a lot about the federal government, and we look at the federal government as this one amorphous entity, as if it ends at the executive. But a lot of the things, that issues that we see, from budgeting to crazy spending, happens within the MDAs. You ask what is the value of particular MDAs, people, and we keep creating additional MDAs to do the work that another MDA was supposed to have been doing. Simply because of somebody says that MDA is not ineffective. So we do need to see a change. What I would like the Senate to do is go back into its books, check for the appropriate laws that they can use to either ensure that these guys get bench warrants or whatever summons they can utilize, and they can push this to the full extent of the law. But as long as they are ready to keep on playing the political game where these things are settled outside in the background, they shouldn't expect anything to change.
Hmm.
Because once everybody knows that, hey, I didn't know it's a game, these guys are they're going to do some entertainment on NTA News, sorry, on the public, broadcasting service that is going to cover certain sessions. We are going to laugh, gist, somebody drops one or two anecdotes. Nigerian populace is properly
Which
entertained, and we
actually
go
is
back.
how it usually goes.
Yes, Nigerian
To be
populace
honest.
is properly entertained, and we go back to square one, and next year again we rinse and repeat until people know that this is actual business and these guys, we're going to take it seriously. Then we'll see some change. But as long as it's this cycle, you don't expect to see any changes if we continue this way.
So in a nutshell, as long as there are no consequences to action, we are just going
Yeah,
around in a vicious cycle,
definitely.
more or less. All right, let's take your messages as we get along this morning. This is from Abayomi. Abayomi says, as citizens, what products or services do you create for fellow Nigerians to purchase? This is a critical step in driving our nation's growth through the sale of locally produced goods. There are a number of people who are doing good business here, but the question everybody asks is the environment enabling enough?
About me, we can have a whole day's discussion on this. I do think that yes, the citizens can do much more, but I do think also we need to look at what, are you able to comparatively trade outside of the country after you look at your expenses. Look at the cost that some businesses are earning today. I know we hear a lot from the government being able to say we're trying to adjust this, we're trying to streamline taxes or whatever, but we're talking, what about the informal payments that they have to make? Who is protecting the business owner from having to pay those informal payments that come from somebody just setting up a shop in front of their shop and closing it down for them before they do things like this? We need to have a very frank discussion if we want to move for Nigeria forward. It's not just about pointing fingers at the government, which is what you're trying to point out, but the citizens also definitely also have a role to play. But we need to have this honest discussion and look at, what do we need to do? What do we need from the government? Which is what a lot of the private sector have been pointing out. Their private sector ingredients are keep saying this is what we need. We want to produce. We don't want to be shutting our manufacturing. We don't want to shut down our manufacturing lines. We're
Right.
not happy to be losing money every day. You know, we want to be productive, but this your policy, that's your policy. This is happening and it's stifling our growth. But these are the challenges we have. How do we think through a solution? So let's stop this brick batting about it's not the government, it's the citizen. Let's be upfront with each other. Let's move forward.
All right, he further says, to build a prosperous Nigeria, we must focus on production. Nigerians must produce to earn and thrive. Let's act with purpose and achieve success together. It's also important to reflect what are we contributing to our country. In the nations we often compare ourselves with, citizens fulfill their responsibilities, including paying taxes. Shouldn't we do the same in Nigeria? All right, Fabian says, I would rather say that the government is trying to tell its citizens to have faith in it. However, faith without works is dead or are dead. Fabian, inner theologist coming out. And as the elite and those presently in power aren't showing their works by walking the talk, trust as well as faith will be absent. A lot of people engage in crime due to poverty, poor upbringing, and peer pressure as well. D from Ikeja says, the Three Little Pigs comes to mind or came to mind when you read out the news headline that had to do with the Senate's threats. D, as an aside, I think the big bad wolf was the victim in that story. But hey, that's unpopular opinion from here. Tony from Marine Beach says the Senate has lost their respect for the same reasons the police has lost their respect. Off your mic saga still on our minds. No surprises by the MDA's actions towards the Senate. Ajayi Oloniluwa says it's an open secret that IMF and its recommended policy reforms has brought more hardship than relief to developing countries. The major plank of their policy to devalue the currency in order to reduce imports always results in galloping inflation. And Idimapusa says, we really need to clap for the APC for winning the hearts of Nigerians despite the sufferings in the land. They won Edo and Ondo states effortlessly and are gearing to win all states before 2027, courtesy of Prophet Ganduje. Nigerians are falling in love with suffering and hardship. It is well. All right. On that note, we need to call it a morning. Very, very interesting messages. Thank you so much, Chibuzor, for coming through.
It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you all for your messages and always keeping it tuned to Smooth 98.1. Do not go anywhere because at 8:15 we'll get to walk into the grapevine, talk about entertainment, spitting all that tea and the good stuff.
The stories, the news, the narratives of national current affairs. Freshly pressed on Smooth
If you